Hey there. Welcome to Milk and Meat Livestream. I'm Sean, and this is my lovely wife, Lindsay.
Hey guys, Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom, sweetie.
Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you for joining me again. It's been a long time.
Thanks.
Thank you, everyone that's here with us. There's a lot of people in the chat already. They must be showing up to see you. Since I don't have my headphones on tonight, everybody, let me know if you can hear us well. Otherwise, we might need to adjust the mic settings. But let us know if you can hear us clearly and with decent volume. But yeah, we've got a fun topic tonight. Talking about the Canaanites. And so we're going to be going over the history and the interactions with Israel and why they're spoken about as they are in prophecy. Sorry, Stephen Schofield said, looks good and sounds good. Thank you, everybody. So as we dive into this idea of the Canaanites, a lot of people really struggle. It's mostly people that haven't really read the Bible. They really struggle with how could Yahweh of the Old Testament tell the Israelites to go and utterly destroy the inhabitants of the land of Canaan. Now, specifically, the Canaanites was a group within the land of Canaan, but the general premise included 7 big tribes. The Canaanites were a part of them, but the land itself was called the land of Canaan. And we're going to go over why it's called the land of Canaan. The tribes that inhabit it, including the specific tribes of Canaan itself, the Canaanites. But it's kind of like, if I could give it a modern day analogy, sweetie, it's kind of like saying you are in North America and you're an American, and you're not Mexican, right? You're not of the country of Mexico, but you're of the tribe of the Americans in North America. Right. That's kind of like the comparison of being a Canaanite in the land of Canaan, if you will. So while there are other tribes with different names. But welcome everybody. We've got quite a few people here. Just want to say a quick hello. Miss Janet's back, Mr. Bear, Mary Slaughter, Stephen Schofield, Gilbert Miranda, Mary Slattery. Let me see, Mama Lou Bear, Bill Craddock, Kay Cabin, Jay Savoy, Gerald Nayoyan. I'm sorry, I think I messed that up. Gerald Nayoan. Miss Marsh is back. Royce Bell's back. And Intellectual Platypus is here. Mr. Visionary. D. Love. Mohammed M. Naouf. The Lion Within Us. Welcome, everyone. Welcome. There's more people than I can name, really, but because we want to jump right into it. We've got a lot of stuff. As always, guys, we're going to go over the basic premise of tonight's thumbnail, right? The title of the show, the whole idea of here. But then after the end, we're going to have a small Q&A time if you want to ask your questions. Just hold your questions until that time at the end. That way we see them. And when you're ready to type your question, turn on your caps lock and make sure it's all capitalization. That way ourselves or the moderators, we can easily see your question and it doesn't get overlooked, okay?
Yeah, and I'm just going to go ahead and do the spoiler alert. It's not because they were Nephilim tribes. Just going to get that out of the way right now.
Yeah, there were Nephilim in them.
Sure.
But it's not that simple.
Yeah, a lot of people when they get into the apologetic side, that's where they tend to go with this issue of the Canaanites. Well, all the ites that are, commanded to be destroyed in the Old Testament. And a lot of them go back to Genesis 6:4 and make a lot of assumptions. And basically it turns into a variant of a serpent seed type thing where it's their genetics that made it legally okay for Yahweh to command what he did. But you'll see
that's not the story.
You'll see that's not the case. Yeah. There is a legal reason.
Yes.
But it's not that.
It's not that. Let's jump right into it, guys. One second. Let me fix something real quick. All right. So the big question a lot of people have is, why did God tell Israel to destroy the Canaanites? And we're going to pick up the storyline after the Exodus of the Israelites coming out of Egypt. All right. So this is where they were brought from Egypt into, as you see on the screen here, the map. This is the land of promise. And so this is the general term that's used was, they're taking the land of Canaan to go to the land of promise, or the promised land, if you will. But even understanding that term of why it's the promised land takes us all the way back to the days of Abraham, takes us further back into, it goes even further back. The book of Jubilees expounds even all the way back to Adam. Like they knew there was a specific area, but tonight we're going to cover some of that stuff in Jubilees. Also, just as a quick, for those of you who may be new to the channel, I just want to make sure everyone is aware that the land of Goshen was in the River Nile Delta of the southern kingdom of Egypt. It was backwards back in the day, sweetie, as you probably already know. Like they called the northern part of Egypt the southern kingdom, and the lower part,
Right.
they called it the opposite of what we might think with north and south.
Right.
So this was considered the lower kingdom. But it was where the green is on the map here, the River Nile Delta, and this is where the land of Goshen was, which was where the actual descendants of Jacob had went down, and they lived for several hundred years flourishing when Joseph was, viceroy or vice president, if you will, of all of Egypt for a long time. And so over time, they become oppressed. There's the great moment of the Exodus. They're brought out of the land of Goshen, and they're taken to, or they're supposed to be taken to this territory called the land of Canaan over here, which we know today is like a modern day Israel type area.
Right.
But we're going to actually go over how that place got its name and why it's even called that. So, but real quick, let's jump into the story where it gets to the point of this controversial statement where Yahweh tells them to utterly destroy the inhabitants of the land of Canaan. So here with Moses and the spies that he sent out at the beginning of the Exodus, after they come out of Egypt and they're going towards the land of Canaan, in Numbers 13, 17 through 19, Moses says, when Moses sent them to spy out the land of Canaan, he said to them, go up there into the Negev, then go up into the hill country. See what the land is like, whether the people who live in it are strong or weak, whether they are few or many. How is the land in which they live? Is it good or bad? How are the cities in which they live? Are they like open camps, or are they with fortifications? And then he goes on, and when the spies return, that's when you get this small conversation in verse 25 through 29. When they returned from spying out the land at the end of the 40 days, they proceeded to come to Moses and Aaron and to all the congregation of the sons of Israel in the wilderness of Paran at Kadesh. And they brought back word to them and to all the congregation and showed them the fruit of the land. Thus they told them and said, we went into the land where you sent us, and it certainly does flow with milk and honey, and this is its fruit. Nevertheless, the people who live in that land are strong, and the cities are fortified and very large. And moreover, we saw the descendants of Enoch there. Amalek is living in the land of Negev, and the Hittites and the Jebusites and the Amorites are living in the hill country, and the Canaanites are living by the sea and by the side of the Jordan. So this is this setting here that we are now seeing. Moses told them to go into the land of Canaan. And guys, the reason why we're going over this as we are right now is because oops, that doesn't look good. We want to make sure that people understand the differentiation of the terms so that we're not conflating ideas. They went into a region of land called the land of Canaan, and in that region, they saw multiple different tribes by different names, like the Jebusites, the Amorites, the Hittites, but one of those tribes was specifically called Canaanites.
Right.
Okay. So this is where they're afraid. They come back and they say, wow, they're giants there. It's the descendants of Enoch. The cities are fortified, right? So that means they have like castle-like cities with walls around them, and it's kind of like we're going to see at Jericho here in a little bit. So it was a strategic military exploration, a reconnaissance, if you will. So if we keep going here, Deuteronomy chapter 7, this is where we get to that famous phrase, verses 1 through 2. When the Lord your God brings you into the land where you're entering to possess it and clears away many nations before you, the Hittites, the Girgashites, and the Amorites, and the Canaanites, and the Perizzites, and the Hivites, and the Jebusites, 7 nations, greater and stronger than you. When the Lord your God delivers them before you and you defeat them, then you shall utterly destroy them. You shall make no covenant with them and show no favor to them. So this is the great command, right? And so people are they get up in arms about this, which,
right,
in my opinion, it's either great ignorance or the spirit that causes you to reject God is literally the spirit they were fighting back in those days. It's the same family of evil spirits. But the whole concept is these clans and these nations were all inside the land of Canaan, and God told them to utterly destroy them. Sweetie, does that seem fair? Does that seem like a cool thing?
If I had no other context and no history involved, yeah, possibly. I mean, this is one of the things that I used when I was an unbeliever to cast aspersions on the Bible. Yeah. One thing I want to remind everybody here is that this is not the only place in the world where giants existed. So I know we're reading a verse that talks about, we went and we saw the sons of Enoch and here's their giant fruit and all this stuff. We assume people rightly so, want to make this fit with the character of God, and it does.
It does.
But
We're going to show you how
people
it does.
assume because giants are mentioned in things, that's why they're going to do this. Well, we've all seen the statues from Egypt. We've all seen their monuments. We've all seen
The hieroglyphs from Egypt.
We've all seen down in South America and Latin America. We've seen the megaliths and all the things that were built down there. We know that there's evidence of giants, from
Everywhere.
Native American tribes in the United
Greece.
States. Yeah.
Yeah.
They were all over the place. So I just want to remind you guys that wasn't the main issue going on in the land of Canaan.
In fact, in Genesis 10, the Captorim, which is we're going to read about here in Jubilees 24 in a minute, the Captorim were the origins of the Philistines who are in the land of Canaan. Okay, very often referred to in the Canaanites. This is where we get the word Philistine. It branched out of the description of where these Canaanites are actually living. And if you go further back to Genesis 10, the Captorim are the ones that originally became the Canaanites, who became the Philistines, and on the island of Caftor, supposedly that's where the ancient Greeks said that's where the stories of the giants originated. That's where the quote unquote little g gods originated, was one of those islands in Caftor. And then so
they were all over the place. They weren't just in this one geographical region.
This is a snapshot of history, guys. Don't forget that all over this area. Remember, when Joseph went down to Egypt and Yahweh used Joseph to help them gather a whole bunch of food because a famine was coming that was going to affect the whole world, there were other nations flourishing all over the place. The nation of the Sidonians and Tyre, as I've talked about in some of my Kingdom casts in the past. Also the ancient Greeks, as we've been reviewing in our Kingdom cast Investigating Babylon series. All over the world, the ancient Indians, there were giants everywhere, not just in the land of Canaan. Specifically, these guys are saying we saw the descendants of Enoch there, and the Anakim was a specific tribe of Nephilim.
Yeah.
They weren't the only tribe of Nephilim, okay, as we see later with Sihon and Og, right, who are Amorites, not even mentioned here.
Right.
So, what I'm just expounding a little bit what you're getting at. You're right, sweetie. And it's good for people to remember that point. So they're coming into the land of Canaan. They're going to get to Jericho after 40 years. It take them a while. But here in Joshua 2, when they actually get to Jericho, here's some of the conversation had. And this is with Rahab inside the city. She says, this is Rahab speaking, that we, the inhabitants of Jericho, have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea before you when you came out of Egypt, and what you did to the two kings of the Amorites who were beyond the Jordan, Sihon and Og, whom you utterly destroyed. Sweetie, do you remember why they were destroyed? Because they came out to fight them.
Right.
So they utterly destroyed them because they were Sihon and Og were the aggressors, not the Israelites.
Right.
We're going to see that pattern as we continue to express all this. Whom you utterly destroyed. When we heard it, our hearts melted, and no courage. Oops, sorry guys. And no courage remained in any man any longer because of you. For the Lord your God, He is God in heaven above and on earth beneath. Now, therefore, please swear to me by the Lord, since I've kindly dealt with you, that you also will deal kindly with my father's household and give me a pledge of truth, and spare my father and my mother and my brothers and my sisters, with all who belong to them, and deliver our lives from death. This is very interesting, all right? So they've heard what's going on. The inhabitants of Jericho, and this lady's being very shrewd and trying to make peace with the Israelites before they get there and take over the Jerichoites, or whoever these, whatever clan they're a part of. And this goes on to be fulfilled, right? Her and her whole family and everyone associated with her family is spared, even when all the other inhabitants of this city are killed, because they are they're like a outpost city going into the land. All right. So in military terms, guys, if you would do, Solomon did this when he built chariot cities on the borders of Israel, because these are considered military strategies where you would build a strong fortified city like Jericho was on the extent borders of the land. That's why it was such a big deal. Like the Israelites come in Numbers 30 through 35. They're coming up through the plains of Moab. This is right before Moses dies, and they spend about 5 months there. And then Moses dies, and then they're going to be taking Joshua is commanded to take all of Israelites over the Jordan River into actual land of Canaan. So they're at the border of the land of Canaan for a long time, and they're facing an outpost city, which is a fortified military strategy that the inhabitants of the land of Canaan had put up there. This is why if you continue to read Joshua, you'd see the rest of the inhabitants of the land, after they hear what happens with Joshua, they're immediately either trying to trick the Israelites into not attacking them, like the inhabitants of Gibeon, or like some of the other cities and kings within the land. They're trying to form alliances immediately to go attack the Israelites, because these guys have stepped into a land they're trying to defend. Why are these kings of the land of Canaan and all their fortified cities trying to defend themselves against the Israelites when it was Sihon and Og that went out and fought against the Israelites on their own volition? And because remember, Moses just asked that we might pass through peacefully.
Right.
But Sihon was like, no, we're going to come out and kill you. And so Og and Sihon, both of them, tried to do this, right? So there was many other, if you read the story of the 40 years from the Israelites leaving Egypt and going to this point here in Joshua 2, Sihon and Og were the people they had to fight. They also had to fight Amalekites coming out immediately in Exodus 17. But between the Amalekites and Sihon and Og, and then to this point, they were trying to stay away from everybody. They weren't trying to fight anyone. In fact, they went through the Edomites and the Mount Seir and all the inhabitants there and didn't fight with anybody. They went through the land of the Ammonites and didn't fight anybody. So the point is, they were being specifically taken to the land of Canaan. And the big question is why? Mm-hmm. Why specifically the land of Canaan? And the inhabitants of the land of Canaan, all these kings in different cities, why are they specifically trying to kill the Israelites? And we're going to go into the history of that right now. Okay, guys? So if we look at, this is actually, we're gonna continue with scriptures, and I rarely do this, but I'm gonna pull a historical point of view real quick into the mix. And this is from Antiquity of the Jews, book 5, chapter 20. This gives us an inclination of the mindsets of a Jewish historian in the 2nd century AD and what he thought about this particular topic and what was commonly well understood and known, which I'm going to show you from the scriptures as well. Okay. He says in chapter 5 or chapter 20 of book 5, he says, "And now Joshua was old and saw that the cities of the Canaanites was not easily to be taken, not only because they situate in such strong places, but because of the strength of the walls themselves, which being built round about, the natural strength of the places on which the city stood seemed capable of repelling their enemies from besieging them, and of making those enemies despair of taking them. For when the Canaanites had learned that the Israelites came up out of Egypt in order to destroy them, they were busy all the time in making their city strong."
It's almost like they were anticipating something.
So guys, that whole time that Israel is wandering in the desert, waiting to go into the land of Canaan for 40 years, 38, approximately 40, the Canaanites knew they were coming for them. Why? Why would they know they were coming for them and started making themselves busy to fortify all their cities? Why would they do this? Now, at the beginning of the 40 years, like we read from Numbers 13, Moses sent spies in the land. Those spies came back and said, yeah, they've got fortified cities, they've got tall things. Why? Now, according to Josephus, from point A of the Exodus to point B of Joshua's day, they increased their activity to make their cities even stronger.
Went into overdrive.
Why? There's a reason. They knew the Israelites were coming. Why would they know that the Israelites were coming out of Egypt in order to destroy them? Let's dig into it, okay? This is the history that we're not told, which is why so many people just assume the Nephilim theory, right? But here's the history that goes into this stuff. And this goes all the way back to prophecy with Abraham in Genesis 15, 13 through 17, where he says, "And God said to Abram, know for certain that your descendants will be strangers in a land that's not theirs, where they will be enslaved and oppressed for 400 years. But I will also judge the nation whom they will serve, and afterward they will come out with many possessions. As for you, you shall go to your fathers in peace. You will be buried at a good old age. And then in the 4th generation they will return here, for the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet complete. It came about when the sun had set that it was very dark, and behold, there appeared a smoking oven and a flaming torch, which passed between the pieces." So guys, we got two statements in here that he's talking about. He says, in the 4th generation, it talks about your descendants will be enslaved and oppressed for 400 years, but Yahweh promises he will judge the nation whom they will serve. We all know that's the Exodus, right? This is what's expressed in the book of Exodus, chapters 1 through 14. And then specifically, we're going to go into why Egypt, why they were in Egypt, why they were being oppressed in Egypt, and how that matters to this topic tonight. So please stick with us. Also hit the like button if you haven't already.
Yeah, because if you recall, when they first went to Egypt, they were greatly favored in that country and by those kings.
Yeah, and they had peace with the Egyptians.
Right.
So what changed?
For a king to rise up who didn't know who Joseph was and didn't care who Joseph was, that is a significant detail that is often overlooked.
Yeah, and we're going to go into who that king actually was, okay, guys? So the second thing in this prophecy here is that when they actually return to the land, it says, for the iniquity of the Amorite is not yet complete. So that's a subtle way of Yahweh telling Abraham he's going to judge the Amorites. And we see that happen with Moses in Deuteronomy 2 and 3 when they fight Sihon and Og. We see that happen. There was more Amorites actually in the northern land of Canaan as well, but they get judged as well. So there's a whole bunch of them. They're in part of the 31 kings that Joshua takes over. So we already have the prophecy set up in Abraham's day. All right. And he goes on to say, and on that day, the Lord made a covenant with Abraham, saying, to your descendants, I have given this land from the river of Egypt as far as the great river, the river Euphrates, the Canaanite and the Kenizzite, the Cabinite and the Hittite, the Perizzite and the Rephaim, the Amorite and the Canaanite, the Girgashite and the Jebusite. Same nations we saw mentioned in Deuteronomy 7, same nations you'll see mentioned in Exodus 23. Why does he say to Moses at this point, or to Abraham at this point in history, I have given this land to your descendants? I have given this land. Guys, this was not the first time that this has been spoken. We're going to show you that tonight. This is a repeat of this promise to Abraham's forefathers, to Abraham, and to Abraham's descendants. It's all part of the same covenant promise. This land was already given to Abraham's descendants. This wasn't something that was made up on the spot that day. Okay. And so we're going to go into the details of that because this is a legal contract. So before the Israelites went down to Egypt, this is what we're going to look at now. This is in Jubilees 24. All right. Remember, we just talked about Genesis 15, and we just went over Abraham. Now, Abraham had a son named Isaac. Abraham and Isaac had problems with the Canaanites when they dwelt in the land of Canaan. And Isaac specifically had big problems with the Philistines. So let's read this verse real quick. In 28 through 30, it says, and Isaac on that day, but let me give you some back history, guys, real quick. Just a couple sentences here. Before we read these passages, if you go back and read the rest of Jubilees 24, Isaac had big problems with the Philistines because he kept digging wells, and the Philistine king would come in with his military commander, and they would take over the well.
Yeah, and those issues are also laid out in Genesis as well.
Right.
We see the issues with,
but we don't get this particular prophecy that we do in Jubilees, which makes sense of everything. Okay. Yeah. So you're in Jubilees 24, 28 through 30. And Isaac on that day cursed the Philistines and said, cursed be the Philistines unto the day of wrath and indignation from the midst of all nations. May God make them a derision and a curse and an object of wrath and indignation in the hands of the sinners, the Gentiles, and in the hands of the Kittim. And whoever escapes the sword of the enemy and the Kittim, and what he's meaning about this is whoever of the Philistines escapes the sword of the enemy and the Kittim. May the righteous nation root out in judgment from under heaven. For they shall be the enemies and foes of my children throughout their generations upon the earth, and no remnant shall be left to them, nor one that shall be saved on the day of the wrath of judgment. For destruction and rooting out and expulsion from the earth is the whole seed of the Philistines reserved. And there shall no longer be left for these Caphtorim a name or a seed on the earth. So this passage actually ties us back to Genesis 10, explaining this, the Caphtorim became the Philistines, and that on the day of judgment and wrath, when is that, sweetie?
Day of the Lord.
The day of the Lord, when the Son of Man returns, Yeshua of Nazareth comes back and routs judgment on the earth. It's a day of judgment and wrath. The whole seed of the Philistines is reserved for destruction and for rooting out and from expulsion from the earth. So what does this mean? It's using the word seed, sweetie. So doesn't it mean they're genetic descendants?
Obviously, that's the only thing it could mean.
Isn't that the only thing it could ever mean, ever? Is that the only context it's ever used in?
I mean, we're obviously clearly actual genetic descendants of Abraham because we're the seed of Abraham, right?
No.
Because that's my point.
Exactly.
We're
right.
in Christ. It's
right.
our hearts and our behavior that make
right.
us the seed of Abraham.
That's right. It's our behavior and faith that we're
right.
grafted in Israel, then we become a part of the seed of Abraham. I'm not a literal descendant of the genetics of Abraham,
right.
but I'm considered of the seed of Abraham. So this is how that terminology is used often in scriptures. You have to look at the context.
Right.
So this is what's going on here in Jubilees 24 with Isaac prophesying over about the Philistines. He goes on at the end to say, verse 31 through 33, he says, and for though he, that's the Philistine, for though he ascend unto heaven, there shall he be brought down. And though he make himself strong on earth, there shall he be dragged forth. And though he hide himself among the nations, even from there shall he be rooted out. And though he descend into Sheol, there also shall his condemnation be great. And there also he shall have no peace. And if he go into captivity, by the hands of those that seek his life, shall they slay him on the way. And neither name nor seed shall be left to him on all the earth, for into eternal malediction shall he depart. And thus it is written and engraved concerning him on the heavenly tablets, to do unto him on the day of judgment, so that he may be rooted out of the earth. So, sweetie, this is awesome, because it actually tells you right here in verse 31, though he hide himself among the nations.
Right.
So we know that he's being dispersed.
Right.
So he hides himself among the nations. He's no longer in the land of Canaan in his little tribal group, because he's been dispersed. He's been rooted out of that specific area, which is what was commanded of Moses and Joshua.
Right.
Right. So once that actually happened, and that actually doesn't happen entirely until the days of David and Solomon, but that was the command. If you read Joshua 13, Joshua has 3 strongholds that are Philistine strongholds that he doesn't finish the job, which causes the entire problems of the book of Judges. And that's Ashdod, Ashkelon, and Gaza. Okay, so this is the parts that David actually goes in and defeats entirely, so that Solomon has peace by the time he gets there. But they're dispersed after about the 10th century BC. The Canaanites, who are the former Caphtorim, are dispersed from the land of Canaan, as well as all the other nations that were there. That's how Solomon had dominance over the whole region. All those other tribes that we read about, they had been slowly and over time kicked out of the land of Canaan, and they're all cast out amongst the nations. Okay, and so the point of this is, guys, that it's like we were just talking about, the seed, the terminology of this word seed that's being expressed. Sorry, my voice is hoarse tonight. It's not about their genetics, because as we read from Deuteronomy 7, Genesis 15, Exodus 23, there were multiple different people groups inside the land of Canaan, all cohabitating in wickedness.
Right.
They had their little alliance of evil kings, and they were fine with it. They hated Israel. They hated Yahweh. And there's a reason for that. And we're going to get into that right now, okay? There's a reason that the Philistines in the land of Canaan, amongst the Hittites, Perizzites, the Kenites, the Amorites, and all these other people on the map here, they all had an evil alliance, if you will. And that alliance was strictly, we'll be at peace with each other. Let's just keep the Israelites out of here.
Yep.
Why? What's the point? The Israelites were down in Egypt being oppressed.
Right.
What's the big deal?
Right. And what's the big deal with the Israelites making covenants with the people of this land?
That's right.
Because they're told over and over again not to make covenants
not
with
to do it. So a lot of people don't realize, sweetie, that Canaan actually murdered the Israelites in Egypt. You guys put that in the comments if you knew that Canaan was responsible, not the son of Noah or the grandson of Noah, but the Canaanites were the inhabitants of the land of Canaan were responsible for the Israelite babies being murdered in Exodus chapter 1. Let's read real quick. Jubilees 46, 3-6. Joseph died being 110 years old. 17 years he lived in the land of Canaan. 10 years he was a servant, and 3 years in prison. And 8 years he was under the king, 80 years he was under the king, ruling all the land of Egypt. And he died, and all his brethren, and all that generation. And he commanded the children of Israel before he died that they should carry his bones with them when they went forth from the land of Egypt. Because remember, he knew the Genesis 15 prophecy. And he made them swear regarding his bones, for he knew that the Egyptians would not again bring forth and bury him in the land of Canaan. For Macmaron, the king of Canaan, while dwelling in the land of Assyria, fought in the valley with the king of Egypt and slew him there, and pursued after the Egyptians to the gate of Ermon. By the way, that's another whole concept, but hopefully you guys noticed that the king of Canaan was in the land of Assyria. It's because it was one empire they were trying to take over. So anyway, so he goes on to say, but the king of Canaan was not able to enter, for a new king, had become king of Egypt, and he was stronger than the former king. And he returned, and the king of Canaan returned to the land of Canaan, and the gates of Egypt were closed, and none went out, and none came into Egypt. And Joseph died in the 46th Jubilee in the 6th week, in the 2nd year. And they buried him in the land of Egypt, and all his brethren died after him. And the king of Egypt went forth to war with the king of Canaan in the 47th Jubilee, in the second week in the second year. And the children of Israel brought forth all the bones of the children of Jacob, except the bones of Joseph. And they buried them in the field in the double cave in the mountain. And most of them returned to Egypt. But a few of them remained in the mountains of Hebron, and Amram, your father, remained with them. Verse 11 through 16. That's Moses' father, yeah. And the king of Canaan was victorious over the king of Egypt, and he closed the gates of Egypt. And he devised an evil device against the children of Israel, of afflicting them. And he said unto the people of Egypt, Behold, the people of the children of Israel have increased and multiplied more than we have. Come, and let us deal wisely with them before they become too many, and let us afflict them with slavery before war come upon us, and before they too fight against us. Else they will join themselves unto our enemies, and get them up out of our land. For their hearts and faces are toward the land of Canaan. And he set over them taskmasters to afflict them with slavery. And they built strong cities for Pharaoh, and Pithom, and Ramses. And they built all the walls and all the fortifications which had fallen in the cities of Egypt. And they made them serve with rigor. And the more they dealt evilly with them, the more they increased and multiplied. And the people of Egypt abominated the children of Israel.
So I'm pretty sure it's in the book of Exodus that speaks of a king that arose up that didn't know who Joseph was.
Yeah.
So this is another example of Genesis being this condensed Reader's Digest version of this history. And it just mentions in passing, and a king rose up who didn't know Joseph.
But the beginning of Exodus is, so Jubilees covers all of Genesis timeline and the beginning of Exodus leading up to right before the Exodus, right before the actually into the plagues themselves. It just kind of briefly covers it. But what you're saying is that Genesis has been condensed, and then the part you're mentioning, which is at the beginning of Exodus, has been broken up.
Yes, Exodus. Yeah. Excuse me. I said Genesis. Anyways, this is just another example of further details meted out in Jubilees that are kind of needed to understand some of these things happening in that condensed version that we have in the quote unquote Torah that we've been trained to call it. So in that version of the story, it's like, well, some random king just raises up, doesn't know who Joseph was, and then all of a sudden starts oppressing them. Well, you see here in Jubilees, it seems like a coordinated effort. It seems like these kings of Canaan wanted to get into Egypt to take over the Israelites because they didn't want what ended up happening with the Exodus, where they were actually grew in number and were able to leave and come towards that land.
So this, guys, in case you weren't aware of this history here, the king of Canaan was the one who was oppressing the Israelites in labor and in killing their firstborn males. And he was the one being judged with the inhabitants of Israel during the events of the Exodus.
Yeah, not that the Egyptians had the best religious spiritual practices or anything like that, obviously, but it wasn't an Egyptian pharaoh actually doing this to them.
In fact, it was the king of Canaan that had convinced the Egyptian citizens to turn on the peace they had with the Israelites that were living in their land. So this is a huge problem, right? This is where we have a propaganda war. I mean, guys, think of 2003. We've got to do a preemptive strike before they get their yellow cake and get their weapons of mass destruction. And they come in. Guys, we've heard this story before. This is not new. He's telling them, look, they're getting pretty strong. We better take them out before they come at us. It's old warfare tactics. He's rallying one group against another. It's divide and conquer because they're trying to destroy the Israelites from way back. This is the same group that was trying to destroy Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. So Jacob, I mean, if you read the rest of Jubilees, Jacob had fights with the Philistines while he was there as well. It was problems. So the point is, there was a long-standing history between the Canaanites and the Israelites and the kings of the inhabitants of the land of Canaan and the Israelites. So when the Israelites were away in Egypt, they were actually in a place of reprieve.
Yeah.
Until the oppression started.
Right.
So they actually had several hundred years of actually being in a safe spot, because they were surrounded by enemies in the land of Canaan. So here's the father. Well, before I go there, so they're in their safe spot. The king of Canaan takes over Egypt and starts that same oppression where the Israelites are. So it's that age-old story. A troll can't be okay by himself. He has to come to you to cause problems, right? He can't just chill and be cool. So the king of Canaan comes to Goshen and to Egypt, to all of Egypt, to oppress. He didn't think about what we just read, guys. He did not come in and take over the military forces of Egypt and then say to the Israelites, we better take out these Egyptians. Who did he
Yeah.
side with?
Right.
Why? The Israelites were under the rule of the
Mhm.
Egyptians,
Yeah.
living in peace. He could have turned to the Israelites and said, hey, these Egyptians, man, hey,
Yeah.
we might need to take them out. They're getting pretty strong, right? We don't want them to. No. What did he say? We know the Israelites have their face and their hearts set toward
Or
Canaan.
the land of Canaan.
Why?
Yeah. And why
Let's
is it
go.
called the land of Canaan?
And why is it
to
even
begin
called the
with?
land of Canaan? Let's go there, okay, guys? But real quick, I just want to show you the parallel. This is Jubilees 47, 1-3, where it talks about how the king of Canaan, who's now the king of Egypt as well, because he took him over, he begins throwing their babies in the river for 7 months and issuing basically genocide of the firstborn males, or all the male children of the Hebrews. We see this parallel in Exodus chapter 1. I'm sorry, guys, I wasn't even showing this on screen. Jubilees 47, 1-3, the king of Canaan, who now is the king of Egypt, he starts killing the male children of the Hebrews, just like we see in Exodus 1, 15-16. So it's the same story, guys, the same details, same timeline. But let's go to the root of the issue, because this is what everyone needs to understand, so you can get a bigger grasp on why there's so much animosity between the Canaanites on all the inhabitants, not just the Philistines, but all the inhabitant tribes of the land of Canaan versus the Israelites, okay? So we're going to go here in Jubilees chapter 9, verses 14-15. Thus says the sons of Noah divided unto their sons in the presence of Noah their father, and he bound them all by an oath. Real quick, sweetie, they divided land inheritances. I didn't have time to go over the whole
it's
chapter.
quite a long
It's a big chapter. So this is a moment where they're drawing lots. Noah, his children, and their grandchildren. So there's 3 generations present. They're dividing up all the land after the flood, right? And they're going to go out and inhabit different parts of the earth. Thus the sons of Noah divided unto their sons in the presence of Noah their father, and he bound them all 2 generations, by an oath, imprecating a curse on every one that sought to seize the portion which had not fallen to him by his lot. And they all said, so be it, so be it. For themselves and their sons forever throughout the generations, till the day of judgment. Till when?
Day of the Lord.
Till the day of the Lord, till the day Yeshua returns, on which the Lord shall judge them with a sword and with fire for all the unclean wickedness of their errors, wherewith they have filled the earth with transgression and uncleanness and fornication and sin.
And I just want to focus you guys on that last sentence there. He's not saying anything about their genetics.
That's right.
He's talking about all their transgression. Now, that includes the mixing up and messing with genetics. I'm not saying that doesn't take place in it and isn't part of the problem, but he's saying they're going to be rooted out of the land based on this oath and also all of this transgression that they're doing on the earth.
That's right. So if we go on in verse... and the next chapter in Jubilees 10, 28-30. And so we just got the setup, right? Noah standing there with his children, and they give out these lots, and then Noah's children, Ham, Shem, and Japheth, give out to all their children their inherited pieces of land, all spread out across the earth. Go read the whole chapter if you want to know where those locations were. Jubilees chapter 10 picks up with Ham and his children, specifically this dude named Canaan, right? It says, and Ham and his sons went into the land which he was to occupy, which he acquired as his portion. Spoiler alert, it was all of Africa. And Canaan saw the land of Lebanon to the river of Egypt, that it was very good. And he went not into the land of his inheritance to the west, that is to the sea. Actually, Canaan received what is like nowadays, it's like the Atlantic, it's like if you had the continent of Africa, and you cut it into 4 quarters, he would have received the southern Atlantic piece, where Namibia is and different countries like that. So, but he didn't want to go there. Instead, he sees Lebanon saw the land of Lebanon to the river of Egypt. That is the exact spot that's been promised in Genesis 15 to Abraham, that it was very good. And he went not into the land of his inheritance to the west, that is to the sea. And he dwelt in the land of Lebanon, eastward and westward from the border of the Jordan, from the border of the sea. And Ham, his father, and Cush and Mitzrayim, his brothers, said to him, you've settled in a land which is not yours, which did not fall to us by lot. Do not do this. For if you do this, you and your sons will fall in the land and be accursed through sedition. For by sedition you've settled, and by sedition will your children fall, and you shall be rooted out forever. He goes on to say, dwell not in the dwelling of Shem. So who was this given to?
It's given to Shem.
It's given to Shem, who's Abraham a descendant of. Shem.
Right.
It was already promised. That's why in Genesis 15, when Yahweh's telling Abraham, I've given you this land, because it was already given to Abraham's forefather Shem. And they were all went into this mutual oath. They all took together and they said, if we break this oath, we will get the death penalty. They knew that, right? Ham and his brothers are trying to tell Ham and his other two sons, the brothers of Canaan, are trying to tell Canaan, don't do this. What are you doing? This land was given to Shem. Don't go settle here. He says, for to Shem and to his sons did it come by their lot. Cursed are you, and cursed shall you be beyond all the sons of Noah, by the curse by which we bound ourselves by an oath in the presence of the holy judge, and in the presence of Noah our father. But he did not hearken unto them, and dwelt in the land of Lebanon from Hamath to the entering of Egypt, he and his sons until this day. And for this reason, that land is named Canaan. So guys, what we're hoping you're picking up on, when the Israelites are brought out of the Exodus and they are told them, I'm going to take you to the land of Canaan, that could easily have been said, I'm going to take you to the land of Shem.
Right.
But instead, by sedition, by breaking an oath and an agreement that was made, Canaan went and dwelt in this land that was not given to him. This is why we see in Genesis 14, Abraham is dwelling in this land where these other Melchizedeks are. And we've tried to teach in the past that whether that Melchizedek was Shem or was the descendants of Shem, it doesn't matter. That priesthood came down from Shem. This is why Abraham is paying tithes to that priesthood and was a part of that priesthood. And they're dwelling in the land of Canaan. That priesthood of the Melchizedek in Genesis 14 was in the land of Canaan. This is why Abraham was called out of Chaldea, which was the land of the Assyrians, into the land of Canaan to be a sojourner, because that was the land that was promised him. This is why all that interaction is taking place.
And so hopefully you guys are seeing now what Sean was saying at the beginning about how all of these ites that are living in this land, yeah, their individual little tribes and people groups have specific names based on their genealogies and whatnot, but they're all Canaanites based on the fact that they live in the land of Canaan.
By sedition.
If we live in Colorado, we are Coloradoans,
right.
But we are also Americans because we are in the country of America. So hopefully people are understanding that.
Yeah. So the point of why they would be called a Canaanite, even though they're not specifically of the Canaanite tribe,
right.
but they're considered an inhabitant of the land of Canaan to be rooted out forever, like the Amorites, the Perizzites, those other tribes mentioned, right? And why we have this prophecy in Jubilees 24:31 that says they'll be rooted out forever, just like we read from Jubilees 9, that if you break this oath and you take land that's not yours, you'll be rooted out forever from that land on the day of judgment and wrath. Because what is it? Deuteronomy 24:14. Yahweh hates those who remove the ancient boundary stones.
I actually had these verses pulled up because for the naysayers, the people who do not like Jubilees and always are looking for a reason to throw it out.
Right.
Okay. I personally, I would put Jubilees as the precedent for things, but the way that it works with our crowd, we have a precedent for what's going on here with this curse and the boundary markers in the quote Torah, and Deuteronomy 19, as well as Deuteronomy 27:17 says, cursed is he who moves his neighbor's boundary mark. Deuteronomy 19:14 says, you shall not move your neighbor's boundary mark, which the ancestors have set in your inheritance, which you inherit in the land that the Lord your God gives you to possess. And then we see it echoed in the Proverbs 22:28, do not move the ancient boundary which your fathers have set. So we have a precedent in the approved 66 canon, scriptures that people like to lean on. We have a precedent for this concept here of taking an oath not to move boundary markers that don't belong to you and being cursed if you do.
That's right. So all the way back to the days of Noah, and when Noah's still alive, Shem's still alive, Ham, Japheth are still alive. This rebellious grandkid Canaan, he went into the land that was given to Shem, and he set up shop, and he wasn't supposed to.
And I would also like to clarify, this is why Canaan is cursed.
That's
Canaan is not cursed because Ham did some diddly with his mom. That didn't happen.
That didn't happen. Yeah. That Jubilees chapter 7 or chapter 8 explains that as well. Yeah. That's not what happened. So this is why Canaan is cursed, specifically why he's cursed. And this is this long-standing feud that happens between the descendants of Canaan, who then turn into all these other people groups, and anyone who moved in with them as well.
Yeah.
So this would include any of the Assyrians that intermingled in with them as well, that inhabited land of Canaan that was not given to them. And this happened also. I don't have time to go into it right now. The point is, this is why we have on screen right here the promise that we're about to read, and that we got a preface of from Isaac's prophecy in Jubilees 24. We're going to read from Zechariah as well. And this is the problem. It's the prophecy from Yahweh through his prophets was against the heart of a Canaanite, which was considered the seed of a Canaanite. So it's not literally your bloodborne genetics, but it was, if you're participating in this behavior, anyone that's taking this land by sedition because it was not given to them. So they're coming in and taking it, and they're working mass wickedness in the land.
Yeah, I mean, which
is what Leviticus 18 through 20, the Father explains to them. This is the evil deeds they're working in the land, and for this reason, their sin is full. We're going to kick them and expulse them from the land. So this is the point of the land of Canaan was originally the land of Shem.
Mm-hmm.
If we could do a quick recap before we finish. The Canaanites had a long-standing feud with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob that culminated during the days of Moses to actually murdering Israelites in mass and oppressing them through the Exodus.
Because they knew they weren't supposed to be in that land, and they knew of the prophecies.
That's right.
That the children of Israel were going to eventually come out of Egypt to that land to root them out of it. That would be why they were fortifying their cities for generations, even before that 40-year time span, where they went into overdrive. Yeah. Exactly.
They had 400 years to build up their strongholds and their military fortifications, because they knew this is another great example, sweetie, of, we talked about this like in other episodes, but and I'll say this when I talk about like biblical cosmology. The enemy, they believe the word of God.
Yeah.
They actually know it and believe it. They just try to lie to you to get you not to believe it. They believe it 100%. This whole storyline here shows us that the Canaanite, all the inhabitants of the land of Canaan, I mean, their actions, revealed that they 100% knew and were expecting that God's prophecy through Abraham would come true, and that they were going to have to fight for this land at some point, and they were getting ready for it. They're building giants, they're building big cities, they're fortifying their armies and building their numbers. So this is why I think it's interesting in Exodus 23 that Yahweh says, well, I'm going to draw them out little by little through the hornets. Mm-hmm. Which is hilarious because they can't defend against that. Right. They had no clue to defend against that.
Yeah, it doesn't matter how big the giant is. I mean, if he's allergic to bee stings.
Oh, yeah. You get 1,000 hornets, get him, he's dead. He'll die. So, yeah, I mean, like, how interesting that the Father's like, let me just prep the way for you here.
So then what we're trying to tie this to for you guys is the gospel of the kingdom, the promises of this land area where the New Jerusalem is going to come down and sit. You might ask yourself when you read this prophecy without knowing all this backstory, why would the Canaanites, have anything to do with the promise of the gospel of the kingdom? Well, when we read this verse, hopefully with everything we've just reviewed with you guys, you'll understand why that's a huge part of the promise.
So on the day of the Lord, that the Son of God comes down with warrior angels and fights the wicked on the day of Armageddon, Zechariah 14 picks up some of the details of this day and this event. And it says in verse 21, every cooking pot in Jerusalem and in Judah will be holy to the Lord of hosts, and all who sacrifice will come and take of them and boil in them. And there will no longer be a Canaanite in the house of the Lord of hosts in that day. Why? Because the house of the Lord of hosts, also Isaiah 2, 3-5, is called the mountain of the Lord, the house of Zion, is the New Jerusalem, and it sits down on the land that's promised to Abraham. That was also promised to Shem. It's promised to all of Israel in faith and belief, right? From the river of the Euphrates, which is the entrance of Hamat that we talked about earlier, to the brook of the Egypt, from the Egyptian river to the Euphrates River. So it's a big land area, and the New Jerusalem is going to sit down and encompass all that and a little bit more to the north. But that goes into that's why there's be massive land reshifting that day. We've already done lots of videos on that. Please check out our Road to Rescue series where we talked about some of that stuff with Ken, and check out our Kingdom Portion series where we went over lots and lots of Day of the Lord descriptions and verses. But this is one of them specifically that relates to the Canaanites, and it's not a blood genetic thing. Right. Yes, there were blood-borne genetics amongst other clans in the inhabited land called Canaan. The only reason that land was called Canaan was because it was stolen. Mm-hmm. it was supposed to be called the land of Shem.
And, honestly, like if this is echoing for some people with modern day Israel, and there's like, you're like, wow, this sounds kind of similar. It is similar.
Yeah.
There is no prophecy that the Father will send back in one out of all those 12 tribes, however many generations later, to retake the land. I mean, the retaking of the land has to be done by Yeshua.
That's right.
Because it has to be completely cleansed before the perfectly clean New Jerusalem comes and sits down upon it, and we dwell in there as resurrected beings. So if some of this stuff is ringing familiar for even modern day, shenanigans that go on over there, that's exactly right. If you think there's no behavior of the Canaanites still happening in that land today, you might want to actually do some studying on, what Zionism really is, because there's still plenty of wicked behavior happening over on that piece of land.
I mean, it's illegal to talk about Jesus on the street.
You can't preach the Messiah. You can't preach Yeshua. It's literally illegal in that country. So, take that and marinate on it a little bit if this is the first time you're hearing our stance on Zionism.
If you've ever physically given money to the land of Israel today, I would ask for a refund.
Yeah, and if you're dead set on going over there and doing the tourist thing, maybe just think twice about what you're supporting actually when you're doing that. I mean, enough of our tax dollars go to that country as it is. That's a whole nother rabbit trail.
Mm-hmm. So you guys, now's the moment. If you have any questions, put them in all capitalization. If you have any questions about what we just talked about for like the last, 51 minutes, put them in all capitalization, drop them in the chat. We'd be happy to, answer a few questions for you. We hope that we did a good job being, with thorough explanation of the ideas and giving you some of the history and the definition of terms. Hopefully the context of this story of why this statement will be made in Jeremiah 7:11 or 7:1-2, hopefully we've given you that context so you can better understand it. Please put your questions in all capitalization. And Stephen Schofield is asking, why was Saul told to kill the animals? Stephen, can you give us a specific verse and the context of what you're talking about? I apologize. I don't actually remember that story.
I thought that was in Samuel.
1 Samuel?
Because Saul
12?
gets in trouble for bringing back a bunch of the animals to use for sacrifice.
Was it when he also killed all those priests?
I think that was later on. I thought this was like one of his first screw-ups, one of his first major screw-ups.
I mean, Saul made a lot of mistakes. The dude he did sacrifices when he wasn't supposed to. He made a lot of mistakes. He killed a bunch of Levite priests.
Okay, well, we do know that God did command that. He did command animals to be killed in certain areas, right?
I don't understand the context of what he's asking. Let me wait for him to clarify before we start rabbit trailing. Stephen, do you have a specific scripture you're going off of, brother? Do you remember? I don't remember the actual passage you're referring to. I apologize. So, but yeah, if you guys have any other questions, put them in all capitalization. Jesus Saves is asking, is there Moloch worship there still? Well, yes. Yeah, absolutely. In fact, it's one of my most popular videos on my channel. It's I do a breakdown. It's very small. It's like 3 minutes, but I do like a little breakdown on Moloch and how he's literally, there's a meditation room in the United Nations that is dedicated to Moloch. Now, a lot of people like to say, well, Israel's not favored by the United Nations. But if you look into all the symbolism that I present in that thing about Moloch and his modern day incantation of worship and how they do that, you see that same symbolism all over modern day Israel as well.
Well, also when you understand the Hegelian dialectic and all the world as a stage, yeah, of course, on the surface, the UN is going to be resistant to Israel and stuff like that. But have they ever actually gone in and done anything about human rights abuses in Israel? No, of course they haven't.
Victor's asking, please explain Zionism in your own opinion. Very simple. Zionism is the attempt of modern day military political action of Israel through politics and military to establish the boundaries and borders promised to Abraham, also that Solomon used to have. So this is where they want to take the land that's actually going to be promised to where the New Jerusalem is going to set down, but they're trying to take it by force and establish their own version of the kingdom come, if you will.
Zionism is Judaism ushering in Zion. It's their own, it's not our opinion, that they literally believe that it is their duty to bring in the messianic kingdom. So they're going to have their own Messiah. And yeah.
They're going to have their own. It's basically a big, what's the word? It's basically a big stage show, because they're trying to, with an earthly way, they're trying to replicate what the Father's going to do from heaven, bring it down the city and establishing peace on the earth. They're doing it by politics and by force.
Okay. 1 Samuel 15, I think.
Yeah, Stephen, if you have that verse, drop it for us. I can't remember specifically off the top of my head, and she's having trouble finding it herself.
No, it's 1 Samuel 15.
Okay. Did you find it?
Yeah, verse 9. But Saul and the people spared Agag and the best of the sheep, the oxen, the fatlings, the lambs, and all that was good, and were not willing to destroy them utterly, but everything despised and worthless that they utterly destroyed. So he's asking, why did God? If this is just, I'm assuming, Stephen, what your question is.
This is why I'm asking for context.
Is if rooting them out of the land is just about this sedition, why are the animals included? I'm assuming that's Stephen's question.
Yeah, I don't want to assume. If that's
your question, please clarify for us.
Please clarify, yeah. Looks like we have Christopher Lawrence is asking, can you repeat where Noah's sons were to settle? Unfortunately, that's an entire, that's a long, you have to read the whole chapter. Chapter 9 and chapter 10. You have to read the whole thing.
Yeah, because it goes into Noah's sons and their sons.
Yeah.
So it goes into everybody's actual land allotments.
Yeah. A lot of grandkids. So it'd be an entire show. Royce Bell's asking, are the Canaanites a part of the Gog and Magog war? What do you think, sweetie?
Well, if we're talking about the heart of a person, right. Then yeah, of course.
Exactly. Yeah. Please remember what we're trying to express tonight, guys. It's not literally about genetic descendancy, but it's about all the other nations that were maybe not specifically part of a Canaanite tribe, but were a part of the land of Canaan, inhabitant in mutual peace agreements, because they had the same heart against Yahweh and against Israel. So the people that fight in Gog and Magog against Yeshua have that same type of Canaanite heart. So that heart of rebellion, which was referred to in Jubilees 24:31 as being the seed of Canaan, that's going to be rooted out of the whole earth when Yeshua returns. Remember, guys, the sheep and goats judgment of Matthew 25:31-46. If the goats have the heart of the Canaanite, they're gone. They're killed by the angels, and they'll go to Sheol and have no peace, as promised by Isaac as well.
I think some people also forget that if a certain sin was committed with an animal, that animal was to be stoned as well as the person. So sometimes we look at animals as they can't be involved in the defiling of an area. Clearly they can, and clearly sometimes an animal is required to be killed based on a defilement that has happened involving that animal.
Okay, were you answering which question were you going off of?
I was addressing what Stephen is. I believe what Stephen is asking about, animals being involved in this process of things, and the flow of conversation just led me to that. So
okay. Do you see a question you want to take on?
Oh, thanks, Joy. I'm shy. I think people have maybe got the wrong idea of me because I committed to doing those weekly Torah portions with Sean for a long time. And if Sean wasn't in my life, I would not be making videos on YouTube or Facebook. If anything, I might make tutorials with my jewelry with just my hands in the camera, but I actually am a very shy person and get stage fright and stuff. So Sean has to kind of crowbar me out of, my little hidey place every once in a while to get me to come and,
I had to crowbar you for the kingdom portions sometimes.
He did. Yeah. He really did. Yeah. But, I try to get around to it. I try to make an effort.
Y'all don't understand the conversations we had before we did those kingdom portions where I asked her for months, do you want to do this? it's a commitment. It's every week. Do you want to do this? And she was like, let me think about it. And then she finally agreed to it. And then it was,
and then the commitment came, and I was like, wow, okay,
Yeah.
we're working for the Lord. This is, I think though that also, there's some things that go on where the enemy tries to mess with us a little bit when we try to do these things. And maybe sometimes I'm a little too overwhelmed by all that stuff that seems to pop up. My throat has finally cleared up. I don't know if you've noticed, but every time Sean turns the camera on for us to do a teaching together, my throat starts getting scratchy. It never fails. Never fails.
Yeah, as we would try to film Kingdom portions, and I would get the lights ready, I get the camera ready, and all the slides and everything, so that we could read through. And then I'd have to do editing later. But when she would come in to sit down, she would start coughing.
Yeah.
And like she couldn't stop, and then we would have to wait, and she would get a drink of water or whatever. Sometimes we have to postpone filming, and I was working 2 jobs besides that, so like, yeah, there was, if people could have a behind the scenes camera, to see. Sometimes we would get in arguments for no reason whatsoever, like we couldn't
stuff
even film.
We would never normally argue about. It just would be
then we'd have to stop and pray and be like, all right, we clearly being attacked here.
Yeah, we would record an entire portion, finish it up, and realize there was no sound.
Yeah. Even though everything showed
seemed
right.
to be working fine, just no sound recorded. So we'd have to record the whole thing over again. It was a lot. So I don't want to seem like I don't support my husband. I'm watching every single show that he does. I may not be in the chat all the time because I'm usually working in the living room making my jewelry, but I fully support him and the channel and everything. It just takes a little while for me to warm up to making my cameos.
Okay. Okay. So you did have the right verse about Stephen's question. Guys, some of these questions I don't want to read them because I can't understand what you're asking. Please, we want to answer your questions. Please understand our heart, but you have to ask a coherent question. So make sure that you've proofread your question before you hit send, so that we can make sure you can understand it before we can read it to understand what you're even asking. So if it's not a complete sentence, if it's broken up with a bunch of dots, it's hard for us to understand what you're actually asking, and it's not beneficial for anyone. All right. If you guys have any other questions, otherwise we'll call it a night. So we really appreciate you guys joining us here. Hopefully, if everyone's celebrating, for any of those that are watching that are celebrating the Sabbath, we hope that you're enjoying your rest with your family, and hopefully you don't have to work at all.
Yeah, West Blaze knows.
All right, Christopher Lawrence, brother, you're asking, when is the true Sabbath? Well, the scriptures tell us that it's the 7th day of the week, and then that there are additional Sabbaths that are called feast days that are spiced out throughout the year. And so Leviticus 23 definitely gives you a good indication of a lot of those extra, as well as Numbers 28 and 29. Gives you a great indication of the rest of those Sabbaths. And those are days of rest that you don't earn money for profit. That you take a break from your vocation.
Stephen, if you could just drop a yes or no in the comments if I answered.
I still don't know.
I'm pretty sure I know what he was asking, but
I don't want to belabor the issue, but Stephen, I still don't know what you're asking, brother.
If you could just let me know if you were just asking about why specifically the animals had to be killed, if I address that for you, as far as, there's clearly things that can be done that defile animals as well, and then they are commanded to be stoned along with the person. So I would assume that has to apply to whatever's going on with the people that Saul was commanded to go utterly destroy. So,
all right. West Blaze Music is asking, can you explain Jubilees 231 in light of there being one law for everyone? So I've got it up on screen here for us to look at.
A second, specifically about how it says the Sabbath was for Israel only.
Okay. Yeah. So let's go to Jubilees 231. And this is the part he's reading about. And it says, and the creator of all things blessed it, but he did not sanctify all peoples and nations to keep Sabbath thereon, but Israel alone. Them alone he permitted to eat and drink and to keep Sabbath there on the earth. Yeah. So is the Sabbath is the sign of the covenant, right?
Exactly.
So if you're not in covenant, are you a part of Israel?
Of course not.
Okay.
If you're in covenant,
So
you're part of Israel.
he would not tell people who are not in covenant with him to keep the sign of the covenant. So therefore, the moment you step in faith and belief, you're grafted in, Romans 10 and 11, you're grafted in. That's why there's one law for everyone in Israel. Right. So if you're a part of Israel, whether you're a native born or a foreigner that came in and grafted in among them, you're all obeying the same law. And part of that is keeping this sign of the covenant that you're involved in, just like all the laws were the terms of the covenant. So therefore, it wouldn't make sense to require the terms of the covenant to someone that does not willfully want to be in that covenant. Therefore, they are considered of the nations or Gentile. They're not of Israel. So anyone that is in covenant is a part of Israel. So therefore, you're asked to keep the sign of that covenant.
Yeah, it says that he's sanctified them to do this. That means he set them apart. So if everybody's doing that behavior, well, that behavior isn't necessarily set apart from anything else.
Right.
So, but yeah, to me, I've never understood this. And we're not saying you're doing this, Wes.
Right.
But I've never understood why this is a point of contention for people who don't like the book of Jubilees, because they're the same people who agree with us that once you're in Yeshua, once you're following Messiah and a disciple of him and in covenant with the Father through him, you are part of Israel. You're no longer a, quote, Gentile. So it's the same people who agree with that basic notion will say, oh, well, Jubilees can't be an inspired book of scripture because look, this says the Sabbath was only for Israel. Well, so does the scriptures. So does the canon of 66. So I don't know.
Right. I think people get confused because the Sabbath is introduced in Genesis chapter 2, 1 through 3. So it's introduced before the concept is brought up about, the law being given to those who are in faith and belief that are considered part of Israel, because this term Israel comes later in Genesis. And so people without the book of Jubilees, you can be very confused to realize that the same laws that were given to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob were also given from Noah all the way up to Abraham. It's the same covenant. Go read Jubilees 19 through 23. It's the same promises, the same blessing, wherewith Adam to Enos to Seth to Seth to Enos to Mahalalel to Jared to Enoch to Methuselah to Noah to Shem, all the way down to Abraham. It's the same blessings, the same covenant. It's the same behavior required within that covenant. So this is why we talk about the eternal Torah here on Kingdom Context. And all that information is that same behavior was passed down from heaven. This is why you see in this same passage that's talking about the, let me see where to go. In this same passage. Sorry, guys. It's okay. Yeah, here in verse 24, to this Jacob and his seed, and it was granted they should always be blessed, and the holy ones of the first testimony and law, even as he had sanctified and blessed the Sabbath day on the seventh day. So that's why it's explained to you that the first testimony and law, throughout the rest of the book of Jubilees, it constantly says over and over again that this first testimony and law was what all of heaven keeps, and it's passed down to those in faith and belief on the earth that want to keep it through their obedience.
Right. And actually, one thing that people don't really realize is we use this term renewed covenant in the Torah crowd because they're right in thinking that the new covenant doesn't do away with the commandments. So they start calling it renewed instead of new. But really, the actual renewed covenant was the one that happened at Mount Sinai, because that covenant had already, as we know, we've got written documentation of that covenant going back at least to Noah. And it's, of course, logical deduction that promise would also go back to Adam, because it's like, all right, Adam, you messed up. Things seem pretty grim, but I promise you, if you do my behavior, you'll come back to the land. So
it's what in the book of First Enoch, he's exemplifying the same promises of the covenant and behaviors of the terms of the covenant. He even talks about Sabbaths.
Right.
So
I don't jump on people's posts to correct them of this, but I'll take the opportunity to offer some correction right now. The new covenant is a brand new covenant. And there's a reason in Jeremiah it says it will not be like the covenant I made with your fathers. And what the difference is who the covenant is being made with mortal people are under that old covenant. It's the immortals that come into the new covenant.
Mm-hmm.
So when we say we're under a renewed covenant, because we don't want to actually divorce the new covenant from the old covenant because it gets into all the issues of the semantics with the commandments and stuff, we kind of lose sight of the fact that it actually is a new covenant. And he does say it won't be like the one he made with our forefathers, because our forefathers were all mortal men who were just like us. They're on the time clock set for Sheol.
And the immortals have eternal life.
Right.
The benefit or the outcome, the reward of the first covenant with regular mankind is that you get eternal life.
Exactly.
So since you've already received the outcome or the promise of the original covenant, you now step into a new covenant as an immortal being.
Right.
So this is why that's how you're also going to have the law emblazoned on your heart, and you'll do it perfectly, so you won't sin anymore.
Yeah, basically the promises of the old covenant, that is the new covenant. What we receive under that new covenant, those are the promises that are made under that old covenant. So we're still in the old covenant right now. If you're in mortal flesh, you're under that old covenant. We don't enter the new covenant until we enter those new bodies. Hence the wine and wineskin metaphor that Yeshua used.
Yep. Okay, Miss Lady Bear is asking, can you explain Isaiah 14, 28 to 31? We can try. We can look at it real quick. This may be our last question tonight.
Yeah, I've got some Sabbath popcorn to make.
All right, I'll put this on screen, and that way we can all look at it together. All right, so you said 28 through 31, Isaiah 14, 28 through 31. In that year, King Ahaz died. This oracle came. Do not rejoice, O Philistia, all of you, because the rod that struck you is broken. For from the serpent's root, a viper will come out, and its fruit will be a flying serpent. Those who are most helpless will eat, and the needy will lie down in security. I will destroy your root with famine, and it will kill off your survivors. Wail, O gate, cry, O city, melt away, O Philistia, all of you, for smoke comes from the north, and there is no straggler in his ranks. This is speaking of King Nebuchadnezzar that comes through and destroys all of all of Philistia, as well as Egypt, as well as Tyre, as well as Edomites, as well as the Israelites. He is the one that comes through and then destroys everything. So this is a promise. This is why in the year that King Ahaz dies, it's talking about this is happening. So this is, a lot of people they kind of forget about Nebuchadnezzar. There was a lot of prophecy about Nebuchadnezzar before he actually showed up. So this is one that's kind of thrown in there.
There was also a lot of judgment on the people of this land area throughout its history. So you will see prophecies being spoken at that time of this judgment that was going to be coming for those nations and those kings at that time.
That's right.
So
that's why further on in Isaiah, you see specific prophecies like of Tyre that comes out, and then he goes, let's see where, that's not it. I think it was actually back here. Yeah. So it's scattered about. It's scattered about because none of these books of the prophets were put in chronological order, but it's scattered about during the days of Isaiah, which was 100 years before Nebuchadnezzar. You had this many different areas. Damascus was north of Israel, in the Aramean lands. That was prophesied against. Moab was prophesied against, and then I think in chapter 18 there was another person. Yeah, Ethiopia is even prophesied against because they were a part of Cush. Yeah, they were actually affected when Nebuchadnezzar came after them as well. So Egypt, they're destroyed. This is also in Jeremiah 45. Egypt and Ethiopia are mentioned again together. And it's unfortunately, that's why the beginning of these chapters, they'll say the oracle concerning this or that, because it's trying to set the context for you. They're not all connected. You have to kind of know the context of what it's talking about and know the history, which requires us really studying the books of Kings, 2 Kings, Chronicles, and 2 Chronicles.
And ain't nobody studying those books.
Nobody's studying.
We weren't even studying those books for a while, and actually it dawned on us one day during a Torah portion where we found a little gem in Chronicles. We were like, we should probably do our next, you know, private study that we do on Shabbats. We should probably go through these books that we seem to always ignore and forget about. And we did. And well, of course, we found lots of gems in there that we wouldn't normally have.
Mm-hmm. All right. So we got a good question. And this is actually what we briefly mentioned, but I said we didn't have time to go into all this.
Yeah.
So I'll go. This is Carrie Ares is asking, Sean, did you mention that Pharaoh was from Canaan? Isaiah 52:4 says is Assyrian. And so let's put that on screen. This is a great question. Like I said during the presentation tonight, we could spend an entire show by itself to tell you the empire connectivity between Assyria, the land of Canaan, and Egypt. And so there was the moment that the king of Canaan, who was, like it said in the passage read from Jubilee, who was from dwelling in the land of Canaan, in the land of Assyria, his first attempt to take over Egypt failed because this new king rose up that repelled him. But then later he tried again, and then so therefore he can be the king of Canaan because he had already taken over cities from the land of Assyria.
Yeah.
So therefore he could be the king of Canaan that's dwelling in the land of Assyria, just like Jubilees 46, 3-6 said.
And not just that, but does it say that that king specifically was an Assyrian? Because in the Septuagint, it says, my people went down before to Egypt to sojourn there and were carried away forcibly to the Assyrians. So this, you know, is this a real sticking point for me? No, it wouldn't be, because when there's a discrepancy between the Septuagint and the Masoretic, I tend to lead more towards the Septuagint because it's the older version. Not saying it's perfect or anything, but this doesn't actually say anything about the Pharaoh of Egypt being an Assyrian here in the Septuagint. So
the point of what, like I said, it's an entire show by itself, guys. It's the land of Canaan and the kings and the cities of the land of Assyria. They're constantly taking each other over and sharing power. And so the kings would be from different places at all times. You guys remember in the book of Daniel how the Medes and the Persians took over Babylon, and they ousted the inhabitants of Babylon at that time. So the kingdom of Babylon, people think the land of Babylon, but the kingdom of Babylon covered a whole bunch of different lands and people groups. And the Medes and the Persians were outside of that. They came in, they took it over. So now Babylon is ran by a Mede, or quote unquote a Persian. So therefore you can have a landmass under an empire being named and a king from a different area that rules that empire. But a historian mentioned it very briefly, like in Isaiah 52 would mention the Assyrians came in and got them, right? They oppressed them. But technically that is those quote unquote Assyrians, that may have been the actual army that was used to come and invade Egypt at that time. Jubilees tells us the king of Canaan ruled over that attacking force, if that's what you want to say. So that's a great question. Again, that's an entire show. I tried to briefly mention it, just didn't have time to explain a lot of it. So
there's a question here that's been asked multiple times. No, I can't find it. Someone's asking for all of the titles of all of our shows and every subject of each show. Okay. I don't mean to chuckle at the question. I'm sure you're asking for a reason. We have a lot of shows on the channel. Sean's done a lot
over 300 videos.
Yeah, he's done a lot of different shows. So go to our playlists, and the playlists have everything basically organized out based on the show. We've got Morning Cup of Context, which is just little bites of, scripture here, and let's put this in context. We've got the Torah Apologetics series, and within that series, we've got the Have You Read Galatians series. We've got the Road to Rescue, which is all about the coming of Yeshua, the day of the Lord.
Yeah.
So we've
got a lot of content,
there's the kingdom portions, obviously, where we do the Torah portions every week when we were doing those. So there's a lot.
That's why I make the playlists on my channel. Yeah. So I don't know how familiar you are with how YouTube works, but you click on my channel name and it'll open up my channel page, and you'll see these little subheadings that'll say videos, playlists, community. So click on playlists and it'll pull up a whole bunch of different segments of videos that are put inside. You're only going to see one thumbnail, but inside that one thumbnail, there could be 30 videos. Yeah. That's called a playlist. Not sure if you're familiar. I'm not trying to be condescending, but I don't know if you're familiar.
Some people aren't on YouTube a whole lot and really truly don't know.
You may have just clicked the link that was shared on social media, on Facebook or Instagram or something. So you may not use YouTube a lot. So I'm just trying to give you the benefit here, but Click on the playlists and you'll be able to see segmented and broken down. All of our 300 plus videos are put into different playlists by category and topic.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, this is a good comment here from Mama Lou Bear. Now it makes more sense as to why the Pharaoh did not want to let the Israelites go. Exactly.
That's right.
There's so many motives going on here that without knowing those and understanding those, it really does seem like an absurd, random kind of why does this Pharaoh care if these people go? Why does this Pharaoh care if they get big enough to overcome him? Why would they want to overcome him? What happened between Joseph being vice Pharaoh of all of the land to now these people are subjugated in slavery? So this is some very helpful context here.
That's right. Yeah. So basically imagine this concept here where you're a Canaanite king, you take over the other empires around you, is why you have this force. Now you think, okay, well, I'm going to take on the Egyptians.
Yeah.
Right. You try, they're too powerful. Why were they too powerful? Jubilees tells us that during the days of Joseph, there was peace and everyone treated each other with love, especially among the Israelites. There was peace between the Israelites and the Hebrews. Between the Hebrews and the Egyptians. Guys, financial security and the common good amongst your citizenry creates an extremely powerful nation. So this is where that beautiful, wonderful, process, that ballet of a strong financial sector of your people with people that have unity amongst themselves, you naturally will have a strong military that can use to defend yourself. That takes time for that to slowly erode. And when that slowly erodes, other nations see a vacuum, they see a vacuum and they come in and try to swoop up and attack and take over when they think you're weak. This is exactly what happened all throughout history, still happens today, all throughout history where kings invade other nations. So the Canaanites specifically we didn't go over the other verses, but they're called they're hungry for war. I'm kind of paraphrasing. So they were always a warring, hungry type. I mean, in the book of Exodus, Yahweh tells Moses, I'm not going to take you along the Mediterranean Sea because the people will see war, they'll be afraid, and they'll turn back to Egypt. So he took them a southern route in a different way, which led them to the river, to the Red Sea, where they thought they were trapped, and he had to do the miracle and split the sea for them. So the point is, the Canaanites were constantly fighting with people. And I would suggest they're still doing it today through multiple nations.
Yes.
They're constantly the dogs of war, if you could put it like that. There's a reason why that term is that term, because the Canaanites were referred to as dogs among the nations. So this is, they take over the Assyrians, they get military power, and then they try to go after Egypt, not because they care about Egypt, but because, as the text revealed to us tonight, they know Israel's a threat. And while Israel was in peace and safety for several hundred years in Egypt, they were flourishing and they were growing in great numbers. And so from a military standpoint, you see someone that's destined at some point in the future to come back and take the land that you live in, and they're literally outnumbering you militarily. You try to strike them before they have a chance to actually become an actual nation. But what's interesting though is, like, as soon as they come out of Egypt, they're ready to fight though.
Yeah.
Like, they had already somehow trained, whether they trained in their own communities or whether they participated in some of the Egyptian skirmishes or whatever it is, I don't know. But all I do know is that we see them coming out and being mobilized to actually fight. Once they come out of the Exodus, they're kicking butt everywhere they go, right? So there was a military reason, a logistical reason, and there's a historical feud of why the king of Canaan would want to kill the Israelites. So it's this kind of stuff though. Like, if we had the book of Jubilees still in the Bible, like other nations have had the book of Jubilees in their Bible all this time, we probably wouldn't be doing this show, because everyone would have a totally different and deeper, richer understanding of the Exodus and why we have passages like Deuteronomy 7 and Exodus 23, where Yahweh is telling the Israelites to root them out of the land completely, because these guys had long deserved it. It. They had transgressed an eternal covenant with Noah, which had a death penalty attached to it. They're in the land doing the sacrificing to Moloch and to Baal and all the other gods and to Dagon. Read Leviticus 18 through 20. They're doing all this abhorrent behavior, and they're literally trying to murder the Israelites all the way back to the days of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So this was there's a reason the Father wants to root them out of the land, and it's all just. All of it.
The more that we do studies with this book, the more I don't understand why there are some people who are so vehemently dedicated to making sure that people never take a book like this seriously and never call it scripture. I mean, we have people who their whole goal is to take us down as a ministry because we teach from Jubilees. Like, that's specifically their beef with us, that we believe Jubilees is scripture because we've studied it well enough, and we've studied the Torah in conjunction with it well enough to see that it's not contradicting the scriptures in any place, even where people think it is. I just don't understand why you wouldn't want all this added context, all this added detail. This stuff helps you with your apologetics, guys. If you're trying to talk to an unbeliever about, these commands to go in and root people out of the land, I think it's a much more logical standpoint to take that they were in that land by sedition and they had taken an oath. And even if the person still, thinks Yahweh is a horrible God for holding people to an oath, of boundary markers for a land, you're still giving them a logical explanation in their minds. If you're trying to talk to them about genetically modified human beings who come from angels sleeping with humans, your apologetics are going to be a lot less effective with someone who thinks all of that sounds like a fairy tale anyways. Does that make sense? What I'm saying? You're kind of looking like it's not making sense.
No, I'm trying to remind myself to address this question when you're finished. I apologize. I'm multitasking. Sorry, that's my multitask.
I'm just being the cheerleader for Jubilees like I usually am, just because this is just another example of things that explain so much for you, that put actual logical explanations into things where you don't have to make things up. You don't have to assume. You don't have to take pieces from other parts of scripture and make them kind of fit because, they mentioned we went to the land and saw these giants, so they must need to get the giants out of the land. Those seem like really great explanations when you first think of them. But when you actually get down to the nitty gritty and realize there were giants all over the entire earth, why is it just this one particular area of land? You still run into an issue of logic. So it just boggles my mind that some people are so passionately against this book when I don't see it doing anything but upholding the commandments and giving us a lot more backstory that we actually really need.
Like we've said before, most of the people that rail against Jubilees do not know the Torah. Yeah. They do not know Genesis through Deuteronomy to even know what they're reading in Jubilees to validate it or not.
Right. And
this is what we've learned after 3 years of talking about the book of Jubilees. Real quick, we have a question. This will be our last question tonight. I just want to encourage you, brother or sister, by your YouTube handle. I can't even Mashiachim. I think that's how you say it. You're asking that you're 20 years old, forced to work Saturdays as is required by the company you work for. You want to be in covenant, but have student loans every month and need to pay them. How can you still be in covenant? Brother, if you're in faith and belief, you are in covenant. The obedience, we do this. This is called discipleship, where you get better at the behavior of the covenant over time. Mm-hmm. No one comes into faith and belief under Yeshua perfect. I worked at a job for 2 years, almost 2.5, praying that whole time for the Father to make a way for me not to have to work on Saturdays, because I was in a sales position, and that was when I made my money. Was working on Saturday was one of our biggest days of the week, right? So I was still in covenant that whole time. Before I even realized Sabbath was a thing, I was still in covenant. You guys remember, the Sabbath is a sign that you're in covenants. It is not the marker of being in covenant.
Right.
It's not the gate entryway to being in covenant.
Right.
It's a sign that you're already in covenant in faith and belief and trying to practice the behavior of Yahweh. Brother, I want to encourage you. You're already in covenant. Continue to pray that the Father will give you an opportunity to find either a different position at that job, either have your schedule changed to accommodate for your Sabbath, or find a different job that maybe pays you more and gives you the Sabbath off, okay? He can do that for you. I promise you. He did it for me. So all I'm saying is you're still in covenant. Don't be despairing. You're already in covenant. You have been the whole time. The Egyptians, or the Israelites coming out of Egypt, they went out to renew covenant. If you read Exodus 1 through 10, you'll see that the Pharaoh, the one we've been talking about tonight, that they were not allowing them to go and do the behavior of their covenant by worshiping on the mountain and celebrating Shavuot. So this is what Moses was asking Pharaoh for. They were being oppressed and kept from doing that. They couldn't sacrifice in the land, and they, read the details there in chapter 7 through 9. They couldn't sacrifice in the land, and he wasn't letting them leave to go sacrifice on the mountain to celebrate their feast day. Those are Sabbaths. They were being refrained from keeping the Sabbath. Yahweh pulled them out of that situation with miracles, signs, and wonders because they were already in covenants.
Right.
That's why they were the children of Israel. They weren't strangers that he was trying to convert. They were just in Egypt for a little bit too long, and they got a little bit too much bad doctrine in them because they had been under this bad influence, not being able to worship Yahweh as a part of the covenant. So all I'm trying to say is, metaphorically, you might be in a position like I was, where your job is like you're in Goshen in the land of Egypt, and you need the Father to bring you out through an Exodus. Okay, so just be encouraged and pray for that, because he will do it for you. Okay, you're still in covenant. You're okay. You're okay. All right, guys, we appreciate everyone that's been here tonight. Thank you for all the great questions, and we hope that you're having a great Sabbath. Anything you'd like to say before we leave, sweetie?
We just really appreciate everybody's patience and understanding and support. I'm sure you've all noticed that there's a lot less content on the channel lately, and most of you all know why, because Shauna is working on the Lighthouse project. We're not going to get into all the questions people asked about Lighthouse tonight because it is Shabbat, and that's kind of like work talk. But I just want to say I really appreciate everybody sticking around and being patient with us while there is a little lag in content for a little while, because Sean's just super busy. And so he's doing his best to still make time to get at least a few videos a week. I was trying to help by, offering, hey, want to do a live stream this week on the Canaanite thing, so I'm trying, I'll try to be a little more involved and around.
Oh, sweet. We can set up a Torah ladies study for us.
No.
We'll do it 7 nights a week. Awesome.
No,
you guys heard it. You heard it.
Keep the crowbar at the desk here, because you're still gonna need it. But I just appreciate all you guys a lot. Even though we haven't been able to make as much content as normal. So I just wanted to express that we love you guys, and we just appreciate how understanding you are with us. So
hope you have a great Shabbat, and we will see you for Honor of Kings Sunday afternoon. Okay, guys? See you later.
Bye, guys.